The grave was on the east side of the property, where the land rose slightly before flattening out into the pasture. He had chosen that spot because she had loved the morning light there, had told him once, in the particular way she had of noticing things that other people walked past without seeing, that the light came in at an angle in the early hours that made the grass look like it was lit from underneath. He had not known what to say to that at the time, which was often the case with the things she noticed. He had just looked at the grass and tried to see what she was seeing and had caught something of it, just the edge of it, enough to understand why she'd stopped to look. He had buried her there on a Thursday in April. The whole town had come. Caldwell was that kind of town, the kind that shows up when showing up is what's required, and the showing up had been genuine, and the condolences had been genuine, and he had received all of it with a composure that people had later described as remarkable, and that had been, in fact, simply the composure of a man who had not yet understood what had happened. Understanding came later. It came in the nights, which were the worst, and in the mornings, which were almost worse, the specific cruelty of waking up and having the first second before memory arrives, the 1 second when the world is just light and warmth and the sounds of the ranch, before the knowledge crashes back in and the day begins again under the weight of it. His name was Sam Aldridge. He was 41 years old. He had been married to Grace for 14 years, and in 14 years, she had become so thoroughly part of the architecture of his life that losing her was less like losing a person and more like losing the walls, the world still there, technically, but nothing holding anything up anymore. He stood at the grave in the evenings, not every evening, often enough that the town noticed, and said nothing, because there are things that don't require commentary, and a man standing at his wife's grave in the fading light is one of them. He stood there and looked at the stone he had commissioned from the man in the next town, plain granite, her name and dates, and below them the words she had said to him once that he had never forgotten, and could not put there. The light comes in at an angle here. He stood there and felt the world continue around him without his participation, and understood, in the way you understand things that are too large for the understanding to be useful, that life was going on. He was not going with it. He was standing still. He would stand still for 3 years. Caldwell revised its understanding of Sam Aldridge over the months and years that followed Grace's death. Before, he had been known as the kind of man who made a place warmer by being in it, not dramatically, not loudly, but in the way of a good fire that you don't notice until you're standing next to it and realize you've been cold. He had been present in Caldwell the way a person is present when they're genuinely interested in the place and the people, showing up at things, contributing to things, the kind of neighbor that a community knows it's lucky to have without always saying so. After he was different, he still worked the ranch. This was the thing that kept him functional. The animals required care regardless of what was happening to the person caring for them, and Sam had always taken that obligation seriously, and the seriousness did not leave him even when everything else became uncertain. He rose, he fed, he maintained, he repaired. The ranch continued in good order. From the outside, if you only looked at the land and the cattle and the buildings, nothing appeared to have changed. If you looked at the man, you saw everything, the quality of aliveness that had characterized him before, that particular engaged quality, the sense of a person who was fully present in whatever moment they occupied, was gone. What remained was competent, unfunctional, and completely hollow at the center. He moved through his days the way machinery moves, the right actions in the right sequence, achieving the intended outcomes, nothing more. He came to town less. When he came, he completed his business with an efficiency that discouraged conversation without quite being rude about it. People tried, in the early months, tried with the gentle persistence of a community that genuinely cared about one of its own, and received enough response to know he wasn't unreachable and not enough to know what to do with the reaching. Eventually, with the reluctant wisdom of people who have run out of ways to help, they mostly stopped trying. He sat in church on Sundays in the pew he and Grace had shared, and looked straight ahead and stood for the hymns and sat for the sermon, and went home after, without stopping to talk, which was so unlike what he had been before that the preacher, Pastor Miles, had taken to watching him with the expression of someone who wants to do something and can't identify what. He ate alone. He slept alone. He watched the seasons from the window that Grace had sat beside when she was reading, the window with the particular afternoon light that she had liked, and did not read anything himself because reading was something he associated with her, and he had not found a way to do most things he associated with her. He was, by any honest accounting, not living. He was present. He was surviving. He was going through the motions of a life with the thoroughness of someone who believes that thoroughness is sufficient. It was not sufficient. He knew it was not sufficient. He did not know what. The first year was the worst because everything was new. Every season arrived for the first time without her. The first spring without her. The first summer. The first harvest. The first winter. Each one a door he hadn't known he'd have to walk through alone. And that turned out to be heavier than he'd expected. And then heavier than that. The second year was different, but not better. The firsts were over, and what replaced them was the understanding that this was simply how it was now, that the acute pain of the first year had settled into something chronic, a permanent weather system that he moved through every day without the energy of crisis to keep him sharp. The second year had a flatness to it that he found, in some ways, harder than the first. The third year was the year he stopped expecting it to change. He did not make this decision consciously. It arrived, the way a great many things arrived for him now, as a slow comprehension, a noticing that the horizon he had been watching for some change in had not changed, and that he had, at some point, stopped watching it. He was simply in the life he was in, and the life he was in was what it was, and that was the whole of it. The town had largely stopped waiting for him to recover, not unkindly. Caldwell was not an unkind place, but there is a limit to how long a community can hold its breath on behalf of one of its members, and 3 years had reached that limit, and people had begun, gently and without cruelty, to accept Sam Aldridge as he was, rather than as what they hoped he might become. He was the widower at the end of Church Street, the one with the well-kept ranch and the absence where a personality used to be, the one you greeted and received a greeting from and did not attempt further. He was 44 years old. He had 14 years of a life that had been worth living and an indefinite future of one that was not. And he had stopped, in the specific way of someone who has run out of the energy required to fight a thing. Fighting it, he stood at Grace's grave on an evening in October, 3 years and 6 months after the Thursday in April, and looked at the words on the stone and felt the particular emptiness of a man who has visited a grave so many times that the visiting has become routine rather than grief, and who cannot decide whether that represents healing or simply exhaustion. He turned to walk back to the house on the road at the edge of his property. A wagon was stopped, and a woman he had never seen was looking at the wheel with the expression of someone who has identified a problem and is considering the available solutions. He stopped. He looked at the wagon. He looked at the woman. He looked at the road. He walked toward the wagon. He would not understand, until much later, that he had just taken the first step back toward his own life. Her name was Willa Crane, and she had a broken well spoke and a practical manner, and the kind of self-possession that comes from having handled problems alone long enough that it has become the default mode. She was perhaps 38, with a face that was interesting rather than conventionally pretty, strong-featured, weathered in the way of someone who spent time outdoors, with eyes that assessed things quickly and didn't bother pretending they weren't assessing. She looked at Sam when he approached with neither the wariness of a woman alone on a road at dusk nor the excessive relief of someone who has decided that a stranger's arrival is a solution. She looked at him the way she'd been looking at the wheel, with assessment, determining what was useful. The spokes cracked through, she said. It'll hold if I don't push it, but I can't get to Caldwell tonight without risking the whole wheel. Where are you headed? Sam said. Caldwell, she said. I have a letter from a woman named Patterson. She mentioned a room she had to let. Sam looked at the wheel. He looked at the sky, which was doing the October thing of darkening faster than you expected. I can fix it in the morning, he said. If you want to leave the wagon here tonight, I have a spare room. She looked at him. He was aware of how this must sound. A stranger offering a room on a dark road without preamble. He was also aware that it was a practical solution to a practical problem, and that he had offered it in the tone of someone completing a transaction rather than making an overture, which was the only tone he had available these days. She seemed to read this accurately. All right, she said. Thank you. She was not easy to be around, in the way that certain people are not easy to be around, not unpleasant, but present in a way that required something from whoever shared the space. She had opinions and expressed them when asked and sometimes when not asked, which he found startling and then less startling. She noticed things, the same quality Grace had had, that habit of attention that picked up details other people walked past, and mentioned what she noticed without making a production of it. At dinner, which he prepared with the minimal competence of a man who cooked for survival rather than pleasure. She looked around the kitchen with the eyes of someone reading a room. You live alone, she said. 3 years, he said. She didn't say she was sorry, which was the expected response, and which he had received enough times that it had become a sound without content. She said nothing, and the nothing was more considerate than the expected thing would have been. Where are you coming from? He said. She told him. A town 2 days east, where she'd been for 4 years. Before that a town further east. Before that a life she described, in brief and without elaboration, in the manner of someone who has made peace with their history without needing to display it. She was passing through Caldwell on her way to somewhere she hadn't entirely decided yet. You travel alone, he said. I'm used to it, she said. Is that the same as liking it? He said. She looked at him. The first time, in the conversation, that she'd looked at him with the focused attention she gave to problems rather than to people, as if he'd said something that required a different kind of looking. No, she said. It's not the same. He looked at his plate. No, he agreed. It's not. They finished dinner in a silence that was, for the first time in 3 years, the companionable kind rather than the hollow kind. She fixed the wheel herself in the morning. He had offered to do it, and she had said she knew how, which turned out to be true. She worked with the confident efficiency of someone who had done this before and didn't need supervision or assistance, and Sam, who had come out to help, found himself instead handing her tools when she asked for them and watching her work with the particular attention he gave to things done well. You could stay in Caldwell, he said, while she was finishing, if you're not set on moving on. She looked up at him. Patterson's room, she said. That's what I'm heading for. I know May Patterson, he said. She's a good landlady. He paused. Caldwell's a decent town. She looked at him for a moment, assessing again. Are you recommending it? She said, or just stating facts? He considered this. Both. Maybe, he said. She stayed. He did not examine too closely his role in this outcome, told himself the room was available and the town was decent, and those were sufficient reasons. The other thing, the thing that had made him speak at all, that had made him say a sentence to a stranger that was not the minimum required, he left unexamined. She settled into May Patterson's room and found work at the diner, where her practicality and her lack of excessive chattiness made her efficient and her genuine interest in people made her well-liked, which was a combination that Caldwell found refreshing. She became, within a few weeks, part of the texture of the town without quite becoming defined by it, present but not categorized, which suited her. She came to his property again on a Saturday. Not uninvited. She had asked, the day before, in the direct way she asked everything, whether he needed help with anything on the ranch, as she had some experience and a free day. He had said yes, because he needed help and because saying yes was the honest answer, and because something in him, something that had been very quiet for 3 years, had wanted to say yes. They worked through the morning on fence repairs in the north section. She worked well beside him, kept pace without showing off about it, asked practical questions, made observations that were useful. They talked, in the way of people doing physical work together, intermittently, and about the work, and then gradually about other things. She asked him about the ranch, its history, how he'd built it, what the land had been like when he'd started. He answered with more words than he'd said to anyone in months, which he noticed partway through and kept going anyway. At noon, they sat on the fence rail and ate the sandwiches she'd brought in the practical manner of someone who had thought ahead about lunch. And he looked out over the north pasture and felt something that took him a moment to identify. He felt present, not the performed presence of someone going through the motions, actually present, in this specific place, on this specific fence rail, on this specific afternoon, aware of the light and the sound and the company in the particular way that requires being actually in the moment, rather than watching it from somewhere else. He had not felt this in 3 years. He did not say anything about it, but it had happened. She came back the following Saturday, and the one after that, and the arrangement became a regular thing without being formally established, which was how things established themselves when neither person was in a hurry, and both had enough self-knowledge to leave something alone that was working. He started cooking properly again. This surprised him. He noticed it one Tuesday evening, when he was making something that required more effort than survival demanded, and understood that the effort was being made for a reason that had arrived without announcement. He thought about this for a while, and then kept cooking. One afternoon in December, working in the barn, he laughed. It was brief, a response to something Willa said, quick and unplanned, gone almost before it arrived, but it had been real, which was the significant thing. He stood in the barn after it, and felt the echo of it in his chest with the bewildered sensation of someone who has rediscovered a capability they had assumed was permanently gone. He looked at Willa. She was looking back at him with an expression that was warm and careful simultaneously, happy for the laugh and careful not to make too much of it, which was exactly the right response, and which he had begun to understand was characteristic of her. She had an instinct for the right amount of a thing. He had not met anyone with that instinct since Grace. He did not know what to do with that thought. He let it sit. It was a Sunday in January, grey and cold, the kind of day that keeps people inside, when he went to the grave, and Willa followed at a distance, not uninvited exactly. He had mentioned, not to her specifically but in her hearing, that he went to the grave on Sundays, and she had not mentioned that she'd heard, but she was there at the edge of the property when he was walking back, sitting on the fence with her coat pulled close and a patience about her that suggested she'd been there a while. He stopped. "I wasn't following," she said. "I was just," she paused. "I wasn't sure you should be alone with it today." He looked at her. "Why today?" he said. "It's been 3.5 years," she said. "I know because you mentioned it once. Mentioned it without meaning to. The way you sometimes do." She held his gaze. 3.5 years is the kind of length that can go one of 2 ways. Either it starts to become a part of you that you can carry and keep living, or it becomes the whole of you and there's no room left for anything else. He looked at her. "Which way is it going?" she said. It was the most direct thing anyone had said to him about Grace's death. Not the most kind, necessarily. Kindness, in his experience, tended to circle the thing rather than name it. But the most honest. He sat on the fence beside her. He thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I don't know," he said finally. "I think I stopped asking." "That's what I was afraid of," she said, not unkindly, just honestly. He looked at the grave from across the distance of the property, the stone, the slightly raised ground, the winter grass around it dormant and pale. "She wouldn't want this," he said. It came out quietly, not as a revelation, but as something he'd known for a long time and hadn't said. She was. He stopped, found his way through it. "She was the most alive person I ever knew. She noticed everything. She was interested in everything. She would think it was." He stopped again. "A waste," Willa said. "Yes," he said. "She'd be right," Willa said. He looked at her. "That's a hard thing to say," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry, but I think you've been waiting for someone to say it instead of just thinking it." He considered this. She was right. He had been thinking it, in the quiet part of himself, for a while, the part that knew Grace, and knew what she would have said, and had been hearing it without being ready to hear it out loud. The out loud was different. The out loud required a response. "I don't know how to stop," he said, honoring her, being where she was. He looked at his hands. "It feels like moving forward is the same as leaving her behind." "I know," Willa said. She was quiet for a moment. "I lost someone too. Not a husband, my sister. 8 years ago." She paused. "I thought the same thing. That living fully was a kind of betrayal. That being happy was forgetting." He looked at her. "Is it?" he said. "No," she said. "I was wrong. Being happy isn't forgetting. It's just," she found the words carefully, "it's carrying them into your life rather than stopping your life to carry them. The love doesn't go. You just stop making it the only thing." The grey January afternoon sat around them. He thought about Grace and the light in the east pasture and the book she'd always been reading and the laugh she'd had that had always surprised him every time. With how much room it took up, he thought about her knowing. If knowing was something she did now, that he was sitting on a fence in January with a woman who had just told him the most useful, true thing anyone had said to him in 3.5 years. He thought Grace would have liked Willa. He thought Grace would have, in fact, found this entire situation completely characteristic of the universe's tendency to provide what you needed in forms you hadn't thought to ask for. He almost smiled. "She'd have liked you," he said. Willa looked at him. "Tell me about her," she said. So he did. He talked about Grace for the better part of an hour, sitting on the fence in the January cold, and Willa listened with the full attention she gave to everything that mattered. And it was the first time in 3.5 years that talking about Grace had felt like honoring her rather than losing her. Again, spring came to Caldwell that year with the particular generosity of springs that follow hard winters, as if the cold had been payment in advance for something. And here was the thing paid for, arriving warm and extravagant, and green. Sam noticed it. This was not nothing. For 3 years he had watched seasons change from the inside of his grief, like a man watching weather from behind glass, aware of it, untouched by it, the beauty of it registering somewhere below the level of feeling. This spring he noticed it, which meant it was reaching him, which meant something had shifted in the architecture between him and the world. He planted things. This sounds small and was not small. He had not planted anything beyond the functional necessities of the ranch in 3.5 years. Grace had kept a kitchen garden, and after she died he had let it go. And the going of it had been part of the general going of things, a detail in the larger abdication. This spring he cleared the old bed and turned the soil and planted what he could remember she had planted, which turned out to be more than he'd expected his memory to hold. He went to church on Sundays and stopped to talk afterward. Pastor Miles, who had been watching him with that helpless expression for 3 years, received the first real conversation with the calibrated response of a man who understood that the appropriate reaction to a recovering person was warm normalcy rather than celebration. He was warm and normal, and Sam appreciated it more than he could say. He was not healed. He would not have described himself as healed, and would have been suspicious of anyone who used that word about him. What he was something more specific and more honest. He was in the process of learning to carry the loss differently, which was not the same as it being lighter, but was a different relationship to the weight. Willa was part of this. He was honest with himself about the fact that Willa was part of this, which was more honesty than he'd managed about certain things in a while. She had become. He looked for the right word and found that the right word was simply necessary, which was not the most romantic word, but was the accurate one. She had become necessary, the way certain things become necessary when you've been without them long enough that their presence reveals the absence. He was not sure what to do with this. He was 44 years old and had loved one woman completely and had lost her, and the thought of loving anyone else felt like a disorienting geography, not impossible, but requiring a map he didn't have. He talked to Pastor Miles about it, not directly. He approached it sideways. The way he approached things that were too directly important to be looked at straight on. He talked about whether it was possible to have 2 different lives, consecutive, both of them real. Whether the second one was a diminishment of the first or something else. Pastor Miles, who was wiser than his small congregation entirely gave him credit for, said, "Sam, a heart that has loved deeply is a heart that knows how. That knowledge doesn't go when the person does. It stays." Sam thought about this for a long time. He went to find Willa on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. Their time together was mostly weekends, the routine they'd settled into. She was on the porch of May Patterson's place, reading in the last of the evening light. She looked up when she heard him and did not look surprised, which meant she had been, at some level, expecting this. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, he said. "I want to tell you something." She put the book down, he said. "I was not living. For 3 years I was present and functional and not living. And then you showed up with a broken will spoke and you've been," he stopped, found his way through it. "You've been the reason I started living again. I want you to know that. Whatever else happens, I want you to know that." Willa looked at him for a long moment. "Whatever else happens," she said. "I don't want to rush anything," he said. "I don't know exactly what I'm offering. I know what I'm not. I'm not the man I was before. I'm the man on the other side of losing someone, which is a different man, and I'm still finding out what he is." "I know who he is," Willa said. He looked at her. "I've been watching him figure it out for 6 months," she said. "I have a reasonable view of who he is." He almost smiled. "It came more easily now, Willa," he said. "Sam," she said. "I'd like to see where this goes," he said. "If you would." She stood up. She came down the porch steps. She stood in front of him and looked at him with those assessing eyes that had. He understood now, been assessing him from the first moment on the road in October, and had apparently reached a conclusion he was glad of. "I would," she said. He stood at Gracie's grave on the morning of the 4th anniversary of her death. The morning light was doing the thing she had described, coming in at an angle across the east pasture, making the grass look lit from underneath. He stood there and looked at the stone, and at the light, and felt, for the first time standing in this place, something that was not only grief. He felt gratitude. Gratitude for the 14 years, for the woman who had noticed light and said so, for the life they'd built here, in this specific valley, on this specific land, with its mornings and its work and its ordinary extraordinary dailiness, for the fact that he had been the person she'd chosen to notice things beside. The grief was still there. He was not going to pretend the grief was gone, because the grief was not gone, and he did not think it should be gone. It was the grief of losing someone real and specific and irreplaceable, and that kind of grief does not dissolve, nor should it, but it was the grief of a man who was living alongside it rather than under it, who had found that the carrying of it was possible while still moving forward, who had learned, slowly, through the particular curriculum, of loss and time and an October. Stranger with a broken will spoke, that honoring someone you loved did not mean stopping. It meant continuing. It meant taking the best of what they gave you and carrying it into the life you still had and letting it inform the person you were still becoming. He stood at the grave for a long time. Then he said, quietly, to the stone and the light, and whatever else might be present, "I'm still here. I'm going to keep being here." He walked back to the house. Willa was in the kitchen. She had not moved in. There was still a conversation ahead of them, a future that was taking shape at the deliberate pace of two people who understood what was worth being careful about. But she was there on Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings and Sunday afternoons, and increasingly on the mornings, when he needed someone to be there, and she seemed to know that, without being told. She was making coffee with the efficient attention she brought to everything. She looked up when he came in. She read his face. She was good at this, had always been good at this, the particular skill of a person who pays full attention. "All right," she said. He looked at her in the kitchen that had been Grace's kitchen and was now also his kitchen, and was, he thought, big enough to hold all of that. Double quotes. "Yes," he said. "Actually." She handed him a cup. He took it with both hands, a habit he had. One Grace had teased him about, holding a cup with both hands even when it was warm enough not to need both hands. Willa had never teased him about it. She had simply, from the second or third time she'd seen it, started making sure the cups were warm enough to warrant it. He looked at her. "Willa," he said. "I know," she said, which was not a presumptuous thing, but an accurate one. She did know. And the knowing was mutual, and the words were almost beside the point. He looked out the window at the morning, the east pasture in the early light, the way the grass looked lit from underneath. He had thought, for 3 years, that he would never be able to see that light without the seeing of it being only loss. He had thought the things he loved had become permanently associated with the thing he'd lost, and that the association would hold forever. He had been wrong. The light was still, beautiful, and he was still here to see it. And there was a woman in his kitchen who had arrived with a broken, well-spoken, a practical manner and had, without intending to, and without being asked and without making a production of it, given him back the capacity to notice. He turned from the window. He looked at Willa. He felt the morning around him, the warmth of the kitchen, the smell of the coffee, the ordinary magnificent fact of a day beginning, and felt himself present in it, actually present, which was something he had not been sure he would feel again. He was sure now. Some hearts stop beating long before life ends, not from weakness, not from failure, but from the particular devastation of losing someone so completely part of you that their absence feels like the absence of everything. And those hearts can stay stopped for a long time, but they do not have to stay stopped forever. Sometimes something finds them. Broken Will spoke, a cold morning, a direct question asked by someone who isn't afraid of the direct answer, and something moves, slowly at first, then more steadily, then with the gathered confidence of a thing remembering what it knew. That is not forgetting. That is not replacing. That is what healing looks like when it is honest. Carrying what you lost into the life you still have. And finding, to your own surprise, that there is still room, still light, still morning, still you. If this emotional cowboy story touched your heart, tell us in the comments. Do you believe it's possible to find happiness again after losing someone you love? If you enjoy Western redemption stories, emotional healing journeys, and unforgettable tales of hope and resilience, don't forget to like, subscribe to Broken Spur Stories, and turn on notifications for more heartwarming cowboy stories.